everybody. Welcome back to Undermine Season 4. We're in Episode 8. I can't believe we're already in Episode 8. I'm Tom Marshall, and I'm also your Phish tour guide as we travel back in time to Destination 1.0. This season, we'll be visiting several shows from the early and mid-90s on Phish's road to the tour that changed everything, fall 1997. And when we arrive there, we'll stop and look at every show of that tour on the show's anniversary. We're honored to be your companion on this ride as we all go back and listen to those groundbreaking shows. My co-host for today is Osiris co-founder and HF Pod host, RJB. Hi, RJ. How are you?
Hey, Tom. I'm good. We have an amazing episode today and a guest who we work with almost every day. And so we're gonna talk about that in a second. But first, Tom and I just wanted to say something. We had a good friend and coworker from Osiris, Brad Stratton, who passed away suddenly the other day. He was the lead audio engineer on Sugar Maple and our show we did with Lit called My Own Worst Enemy, Breaking Waves, Seattle, many, many shows. He was an amazing guy and really helped us, I think, learn a lot and up our game about audio. And we wouldn't be where we are without him. And so we just want to say that, rest in peace, Brad. And Brad was a big lover of beer. I had a lot of beers with him over the years. And so I just want to, I have a beer for this episode and I just want to make a toast. I think Tom does as well.
I have a beer as well. And I'd also like to say Brad was a perfectionist and everything that he was involved with, he made sure was as good as possible. He never, ever compromised. And you can hear it in his work. He was part of what made our podcast good, and we're going to miss him. And rest in peace, Brad. And we're thinking about you and your family.
Cheers. Okay. So, Tom, today we are talking about what I think is a seminal moment in Phish history. It's when a New Year's Eve run that kind of elevated this whole career, I think, setting a new precedent for New Year's Eve, setting a new precedent for the band, raising the bar for them in a lot of ways. So we're going to travel back in time to Worcester, Mass on December 31st, 1993. There was a lot that was special about this particular New Year's Eve, as well as the night before, 12:30 from Portland, Maine. This was a radio broadcast. I remember the tapes that I had because of the radio broadcast. The sound was crystal clear. And after the opening llama, Trey says, "Everybody in yet?" And it's just like, it's so, when I listen back to this show, every single moment of it is burned into my memory. So we are going to bring on our friend this happened to be his first Phish show. And that person is named Benjy Eisen. So we're going to bring him in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was also going to say, as I bring Benjy in from the waiting room, that Benjy was there and I was also there, and we might have evidence of that if you listen carefully to the antelope, but we can talk about that later. If you've listened to the past couple seasons of Undermine, then you're already familiar with today's guest. He's been our head writer since season 2, and he's currently an executive producer of the show. But more visibly, he's often my co-host. He's written about Phish for Rolling Stone and many other publications over the years, and he's worked directly with Trey during Fare Thee Well. And having a show host as our special guest feels a little bit like cheating, but welcome back, Benjy.
Thanks for having me, guys. Hi, RJ.
Hey, man. Good to see you on this side of the mic or this side of the camera or whatever it is.
It's good to be here together.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all on the same side of the table, so the table's like leaning this way, which is weird. You've seen close to 400 shows, but you always remember your first. And 12/31/93 was your first?
It was. My first was supposed to be earlier that summer. I had tickets to Wolf Trap, and I made it so far as the parking lot, and a misadventure delayed my first show until this time. However, what that did, though, is in the interim between then, I became a Phish fan after I was supposed to see them and didn't at Wolf Trap. And right before this, so going into New Year's Eve 93, I knew nothing about Game Manager, nothing about Phish lore or culture, but I had at that point been familiar with Junta and with Picture of Nectar.
Got it. And talking about firsts, I believe all the shows that we've covered, and we're now on episode 8, as I mentioned, I went to one surrounding the shows in some cases, like the State Theater before the show that we talked about with Brad Sands at the Field House in New Hampshire. But I was not at any of the shows so far until this one. So this is also a first for me, Benjy, 12/31/93.
I saw you there, even though I didn't know you or meet you yet, and we'll get to that.
Did I have a ticket stub in my hand?
I don't believe so, no. You had a microphone.
Benjy, what was so we should talk about 12:30 as well, and we'll talk about the music, but what was the scene like as you rolled into the Worcester Centrum? I mean, this is a big show for Phish. I assume it was a big show for a lot of fans.
Yeah, so going into it, a big theme for this night that plays into the way the entire night unfolded for me was just I had no context, it being my first Phish show. However, I did see, this was New Year's Eve 93, so I had been seeing the Grateful Dead since 91, so I was acclimated to the idea of the scene. However, my impression going into the Worcester Centrum that night was it was cold. It was really, really cold. I think it was snow on the ground if there weren't flurries in the air. But I remember, oh man, this is one of those rare shows where I can remember the parking lot we parked in and the entrance that I went into. And because of how freezing cold it was outside, I remember there was an issue getting inside, which I think Trey even recognizes from the stage. There's a delay because everyone's bundled up and stuff like that. So I didn't really see any vending or any visible signs until leaving. When I left that night, I remember people were selling things like bumper stickers that said free Gamehenge. And I had no idea what that meant. I just thought it confirmed my suspicion that this band invented their own universe and certainly their own language.
Their own religion, yeah.
Yeah, their own religion.
I always wondered when, when that special language worked perfectly, and especially the one where they do that and everyone, and sometimes, or when people all turn around, the turn one, that people coming to their first show, they must just wonder how in the world could what just happen. And you had like that happening in spades because this was New Year's Eve and there was also a gag happening. So you must have thought every show was like that. Tell us about the New Year's Eve gag.
That's right. Well, so I walk into the venue and, like I said, I'd been familiar. I had some live tapes, but a lot of it was like filler Ungrateful Dead tapes and things like that. So I would say that Junta was what captivated me and You Enjoy Myself particularly, but this does answer your question. But Llama, the first time I heard Phish was Picture of Nectar, and they were described to me as a Grateful Dead version of Red Hot Chili Peppers, which makes no sense. But then the first song's Llama, and that actually kind of does make sense. And the first song this night was Llama, but which I thought was a nice little synchronicity. But overall, walking into it, the stage looked like an aquarium. And not in the way that Madison Square Garden was turned into an aquarium this past April, because the entire venue was. But this night, it was just the stage. It looked like a fish tank. There was, like seaweed and things like that over the amplifiers and over the monitors, rather, on the floor, a giant clamshell. And without any context, I thought, oh, this is Phish's, this is their production. This is what they do. This is their touring setup. And then for the gag, by the end of You Enjoy Myself, which of course I was thrilled to hear live, with that being the song that grabbed me in, by the end of it, they put on a wetsuit. And I'm like, oh, this is just, normal fare for the band. And then, and also it being my first show, I'll say that I was definitely on psychedelics and young and starry-eyed. And so for New Year's Eve, in between sets, they had this thing on the PA system right before the actual New Year's gag, and that's that they had these like burbling bubbles sounding like underwater. I thought that Phish had this technology that turned the entire arena into this underwater, like sound. So, and I at this point I lost my friends. They were up on the 100 section, and I just was so enthralled with the music from the very beginning note that somehow I ended up in the front 10 rows. And this was this was not general admission. There were seats, and somehow I had a seat. Like, I don't know. It just was like one of these magical things. I was like within 10 rows, a seat to myself, but no one I knew around me. And all I could hear from the chatter was blah, 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 blah. So when people tried to be nice to me and ask me questions, I figured I'll play along. And I looked at them and I'd be like, blah, 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 blah. Which I probably shouldn't have said, but that's fine. That's how the night went. And then they came down from the ceiling in these wetsuits and swam down, and they entered the clam once they got to the ground, the bottom of the aquarium, as it were, and the clam rises up and explodes, says Happy New Year's, and the band's on stage jamming. Then I realized, well, that part is the gag. That part's special for New Year's Eve. But the aquarium, I left that night thinking, yeah, they play in an aquarium and they set everything up like an aquarium, and they sing about down beneath the seaweed and the slime. And
you must have been so disappointed when you went to your next show. You were asking people like blah 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 blah, like and where's the aquarium? Everyone was probably like, who is this guy?
Totally.
That's amazing. Well, Benjy, we should talk a little bit about 1993, because we've done a few other shows from 93, and this was like a huge year. I think in the 1230 and 1231 93 shows, I hear a lot of progression, even from spring and summer 93. It seems like they were just progressing so fast, and this whole show sounds like a celebration. Looking back on it now, how do you think this falls in like the history of Phish in terms of a New Year's show and kind of the end of a big year?
I think Trey actually accidentally summarizes it at the very end of this night, because he says, well, it's been 10 years for us. And at the time that blew my mind too, because they were a brand new phenomenon for me. I had been aware of them for less than a year. So, but it also explained why they could be in an arena and why everyone seemed to know the secret language and a secret handshake, metaphorically speaking. And then Trey says, I hope you'll be with us for another 10 more. And of course, here we are 30 years later, almost, still listening. but yeah, I mean, I thought it was a punctuation mark on, and now that I've gone back and obsessively heard, hours and hours and hours of Phish before this night, I think it does sum up 1993 really well, but it also is a very good summation of the first 10 years of the band. I mean, I think Amy's Farm was the first summation and a great, landmark, goalpost or whatever. And then this one. And after New Year's Eve 93, if you wanted to introduce somebody to Phish and you wanted to kind of show off what they can do musically, you probably would give them 12/31/93 with the companion of 12/30 that we're about to talk about, because that one also has the Colonel Forbin narration, which to me was such a wonderful side of Phish that, just to me played to all the things that I ever wanted out of a band, that they could jam and yet they didn't take themselves too seriously. They could tell these psychedelic stories. And then later on in 1230 and from Portland, they do Purple Rain. So, but with Fishman doing it and the vacuum cleaner solo. So after doing a Mike song and some like amazing improvisational music, then they also have this humorous side where they show that they don't take themselves too seriously while playing really serious music. And that to me just checked all the boxes.
That makes a lot of sense. I think the 1230 show, there's a little bit more like serious improv in there. I think to me, the Bowie and the Mike stand out as really like what those two songs would become in terms of improv, like the Bowie feels light years ahead of even the 5/8/93 Bowie that we talked about with Brad, and the Mike's has this thrilling melodic jam that almost is like extending the way that they think about improv in that particular song. I feel like those two songs on 1230 are really representative of where those both will go in 94, which is like so far beyond that.
RJ, you're right. In the 1230 Bowie that you're talking about, the previous show that we did here at Undermine with the Murat Jin also has a Bowie that is phenomenal and long. And if you listen to that and then you listen to this with the Dream On, and I think it really shows Phish's flexibility at the time, and how when they were improvising, they weren't just changing up their solo. They were actually improvising.
Tom, we need to hear about your experience from 1231. Maybe should we take a quick break before we get into this? Because Tom has a slightly different experience from us from 1231-93.
Yeah, let's take a break. Like any good TV show, we teased what's about to happen. So let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with all this and more.
Have you ever wondered what it would feel like if your investments reflected what matters most to you? At Green Future Wealth Management, the advisors specialize in helping clients manifest their values in their financial lives. Green Future Wealth Management was founded by certified financial planner practitioner and longtime fan Nick Cantrell, named by Forbes as one of the top next-gen wealth advisors in the country. Whether you are just getting started or have complex investing and financial planning needs, visit them on the web at greenfuturewealth.com. You can sign up for the email list or take the Investing Values quiz. When you feel ready, schedule a free virtual consultation. In appreciation for the amazing Phish community and the incredible work being done by fans across the country, Green Future Wealth Management will be donating 10% of asset management proceeds from new Osiris listener clients to Fans for Racial Equity. Just be sure to mention Osiris when booking your appointment. Create your green future. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research Inc., member FINRA/SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Inc. Cambridge and Green Future Wealth are not affiliated.
And we are back, and I'm here with my co-host, RJB, and our special guest today is Benjy Eisen. Benjy, we are talking about the 1230 and also the 1231 shows. And could you give us highlights, I think specifically from the New Year's show?
Well, from the New Year's show, I think that the obvious highlight to me was that they did a Down with Disease jam out of Old Lang Syne that was, at the time, nobody knew what it was. It was Phish from the Future, which I think is the point of them playing it, right? You know, in the very beginning, the first minute of the new year, a song that would become so important to them beginning that year. And then the other thing, too, was Frank Zappa had died earlier that month in early December. And they played Peaches and Regalia, but then it became a recurring theme throughout the show, and they teased it multiple times. And I think that, you know, as an homage to Frank Zappa, I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was a riff that Phish had created. And so there was also that double layer for me of later on discovering that. But you know, there are just a lot of highlights, and I'll tell you another one was when I saw them when they played Run Like an Antelope live. And Tom, I know that I know that today I'm not the co-host, I'm the guest, but I've got a question for you on the subject of being a special guest. You know, as we said, this was my first show, so everything was kind of brand new to me, and I didn't really know how typical Phish shows went. I didn't even know that they had a lyricist like the Grateful Dead had Robert Hunter. But all of a sudden, you know, they're playing this Run Like an Antelope. They're blowing my mind with it. And then, you know, I saw you. I think I maybe even heard your name when Trey pulled you on stage and he said, here to sing the first lyrics he ever wrote for Phish, which, of course, as you know, was...
I'll say it. Rai Rai Rocco, Marco Escondolas. Been you to have any spike, man?
There we go.
Yeah, well... Actually, there's a lot of things I have to say about this. First of all, I don't think that they're the first lyrics I ever wrote for Phish. They may have been the first recorded. No. I think the first I ever wrote might be Mackie Super Policeman, and then Trey and I, you know, way back before even Phish, I think, had been drumming on the rhombus and coming up with like Divided Sky. And then, like in his dad's basement, we did Iculus or McGrupp. But it all blends together in my head. But the interesting thing about this song is I get credit for this song, but this is really a Dude of Life, Steve Pollock and Trey song, The Antelope. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and that was in Trey's basement, I think in 1983 or late 82 or 83, when he all of a sudden said, there needs to be something right here, and shoved a mic in my face after, I think, a bong hit or something. And I was in the room with Mark Daubert, who eventually wrote with Trey The Curtain and became the band's first percussionist, along with Fishman, in Burlington a little bit later. But he was standing there, and I had no idea what to say. And I just said, for some reason, Rai Rai Rako. And I looked at Mark and I said, Marco Esquandolas. And again, I don't know why. And then I said, been you to have any spleef, man? Like the Rasta spleef. But then the weird thing is, anytime Trey ever said it on stage, as far as I know, he said spike instead of spliff. So that's a weird little bit of trivia.
I'll tell you that night, watching you from the stage at my first show, I thought this always happens, but I also thought it confirmed my suspicion because of those specific lyrics. Confirmed my suspicion that, of course, Phish had their own language and their own universe.
Exactly. So we need a Phish scholar to tell us which actually was my first stage appearance with Phish, but the fact that I had switched from spleef to spike, and I think I alternate in subsequent appearances, but that tells me that this is not my first time I did this. And Trey had given me this blanket idea where he said, anytime you're in the audience and we play Antelope and you come to the side stage, and if I catch your eye and give you a nod, come on and do this part, no matter where we are or when. And I took him at his word, literally, all the way up until 2012, when he didn't expect me and I stormed the stage at SPAC. But that's another story. I don't think I ever got a nod from him and went on anyway. But that's, that was the last of those.
That's amazing. I got to say, this show, and Benjy, I'm sure you have additional thoughts. This show, for me, I got a lot of play in my car. I mentioned at the beginning, the radio broadcast is part of it, right? We just had these amazing high quality tapes. I remember driving around with a friend in probably 1995 listening to Reba. And since that one time when it really hit me, it's really like my go-to Reba, which I don't, there are a lot of great Rebas from 94, 95 and onward, but the sound quality, the way it hit me, and it's a good version too, but this Reba always is sort of a go-to for me.
The Reba, the whole night has this flow to it, right? And of course, we're going to get to the big New Year's Eve show of the era, which was 12/31/95, but I feel like there's a very similar parallel here. There was that split open amount, there's the lizards, the sparkle, the way that the show flowed. And this is one of the reasons why I think that we're talking about the show to this day. We're not talking about it because of the Yad, even though being there, the Yad to me was like the thing that blows your mind and you think about later on, or at least, from a theatrical standpoint. But musically, as we talked about the highlights earlier, the Peaches and the Down with Disease jam, the Split Open and Mouth, the Run Like an Antelope. And then, of course, it also had a Henrietta, a Fishman moment, and also confirming my suspicion that they have their own language. He came out with these symbols, and on the one symbol was ah, and on the other symbol was B. And so, of course, the song begins with an ah, Traplin Rosie. And then, of course, it culminates with a ba, 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 ba. So he held up both of the symbols. And I also, of course, thought, well, they must do this at every show. They have the ba symbols. So
your second Phish show, tell me it wasn't a letdown. It had to have been a letdown.
No, but because I dove in. I think I went on Phish, Phish.net, Rock Music Phish, and
good.
I was well acclimated by then.
Because you arrived at Phish was hitting peaks all the time, but you arrived at arguably a peak at that moment. It's hard to come down off a peak, but Phish was peaking constantly.
So 12/31/92 was a Boston show at Northeastern. That was the last New Year's Eve show without any gag, right? That was just like Trey counting down. So this this really kicked off a new tradition for Phish. And is there a better Auld Lang Syne transition than this? Because it's so iconic, and it's like the segue is perfect, the energy is so high, and it's so fun to listen to. Still, like to go back and just listen to that Into the Down with Disease jam. That do you remember what it was like in the arena for that moment? Because I assume, like you said, a lot of people didn't know what it was, but now when we listen back, it seems like it would have just everyone would have been losing their minds, but maybe people were more confused.
No, it was glorious chaos in that. Well, at first for Old Lang Syne, that's one that I knew. Everybody knows that song. And I was kind of happy that they did it. Of course, I was sitting by myself with my friends up in the 100s, and so everyone's doing their New Year's kiss, and they're hugging and their friends, and they're saying Happy New Year's, and I'm there going, But it was very celebratory. And the Down with Disease jam, you don't need to ever hear Down with Disease to know how celebratory and victorious that sounds. It's kind of like designed that way, right? It sounds like a victory. It sounds like this just, amazing thing. And so it sounded natural. I just thought that it was probably a piece of improvisation. And I think that a lot of people there, because it comes right out of the Old Lang Syne, so it sounds like they're going right into some piece of improv. And that later on, maybe you can, I know that Phish at a later point in their career would sometimes write songs by going into jams and finding riffs that they, hit upon. So it's kind of sounded like that. It wasn't until a few months later that everyone realized that it was actually, from a composition. And so the venue, as you said, RJ, it was a big venue for them. I remember that was part of the appeal for me going up for them on New Year's. I took the train from Pennsylvania up to see them, and I was like, it was a big deal. Even I knew that it was a big deal that they were in an arena. And I was like, well, this is kind of, this feels like a cultural moment that I have to be, I have to be a part of. And there was that feeling inside that room that night. People were dressed up for New Year's. Some people were dressed up in tuxes and nice things like that. Other people were just dressed as the early version of the Phish prototype, but celebratory. I feel like I don't know if people get dressed up for New Year's Eve like that anymore. The way that that night, I just remember a lot of people were really dressed up as if they're going to a New Year's Eve party, because they were. And I remember the energy in that room was absolutely bonkers. And I as I said, I knew, I'd never been to Phish, but having been to the Grateful Dead, you're in a very parallel situation, the way that it might look without having any audio, just the way that it looks from afar. But in the room that night, it wasn't at all like a Grateful Dead concert, because it was this very concerted energy, and just people just celebrating life.
This you talk about people dressing up. My form of dressing up is putting a button-down shirt over a t-shirt, and I possibly was wearing this one. This I had to dig way down into my drawer, and I found a 1.0 shirt that I very well might have been wearing as a t-shirt that night. And I have to go back and look at video of myself up on stage during Antelope. But guys, can we talk about the night before, Portland, Maine? I know you weren't there, Benjy, but I'm sure you've listened a lot now. What are your thoughts about that? You already mentioned the Colonel Forbin narration and the specialness of that.
Yeah, the Colonel Forbin narration. I mean, 12/30/93 is a show that I must have gotten on tape very shortly after this New Year's show. It was one of the first tapes that I got. And it was one of those ones that, along with 12/31/93, is a prototype. It really is a great. Those two combined were they're great companion pieces. They pair well because they show off all of the sides of Phish. And I know that this entire, by the way, even though I made fun of myself for thinking that Phish had this aquarium every night, they actually did have the aquarium every night of this tour. And that includes two dates beforehand, one in Washington, D.C. and one in New Haven, which they also, during those nights, played Peaches and Regalia a lot and teased it and Old Lang Syne in terms of making the New Year's run one cohesive whole. But I feel that the show 12:30 in Maine, the Forbin narration to me was really, I just, like how original of a thing. No other band was doing anything like that. It really, it appealed to the theatrical, it appealed to, the spectacle side of things. And also the mites from that night. But I really think that, as RJ was saying, the David Bowie from that night is heads and shoulders above any. It was such a great punctuation on the period by also putting its best foot forward and coming up with some of the best versions of these songs to date, to that date.
Yeah, absolutely. Just incredible run of shows. I mean, those two shows back to back, and coming off, like we talked about, an amazing year. Before those, the DC, New Haven, Portland, and Worcester shows was the last show. Before that was the Greek show from August, right, which was another amazing show. So they were just really, as Brad Sands kind of said about the May 8th show, they were just on fire the entire show. I mean, they played hundreds of shows, and not everyone, but the ratio of amazing shows is really high for this era.
It is, and they, as you just said, RJ, they had off that fall, and they finished the Greek Theater out west, and then I believe, I'd have to look this up to confirm it, but I believe they must have been working on Hoist then during that period, and then of course, because the Hoist was released just a few months later after these shows. And Down with Disease was the showcase piece that they kind of did in a very fishy fashion, debuted it in a way that nobody knew they were debuting it.
So awesome. I just, before we wrap up, we haven't really talked about set 2 of 1231, and just the bookends of a great Tweezer and a great You Enjoy Myself is, just a great 3-set show, but those, and a great Hood to kind of close the third set before Tweezer Reprise. It's just an amazing. I'm really glad I got to go back to this show, even though I've listened to it so many times, but it's always such a thrill.
Going back to this show, for our listeners, by the way, is worth it for that Hood. The Hood is a dark horse. It gets forgotten about, because there are so many amazing Hoods out there, but it's really worth listening to.
This is going to be an amazing show. If all this music is mixed in, that would be an endless show. I know that our editor Matt is going to put in a few musical selections, which we don't know what they are right now. I can't wait to listen to this episode to hear if he, what suggestions he takes. And that's kind of the interesting thing about us. Well, we're a good team here, and we've got it simple.
It's going to be Jensen Sullivan, isn't it?
What's that? Oh yeah,
it's going to be Jensen Sullivan, isn't it?
It is.
With a little roundabout tease.
And there was a yes tease. Where was that? Oh no, that wasn't. That was Starship Trooper. Where was that? It was acoustic. And I think that was last episode's show. Sorry about that. Anyway, thank you, Benjy, and thank you, RJ, and thanks everyone out there in podcast land for joining us. Whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us on your stereo, remember to review and subscribe wherever you listen or watch. We'll see you in 15 minutes or at least a couple days. Until then, don't do anything we wouldn't do. And thank you, Benjy, and thank you, RJ.
Osiris.